Last time when I gave my talk about Greece in World War II, I had neglected to include the entire set of these stamps. This is the set known as the Victory set, and this is the entire set as cataloged by Scott. Um, as as we'll see in a moment, there is yet another stamp that the Greek catalogs include along with these, but the ones I didn't show last week, the 50 drachmae um, shows a naval convoy, and then the 100 I talked about, that was the torpedoing of the cruiser in the summer prior to the Italian invasion. This stamp, the 250 drachmae, was actually the first one issued. This set was in preparation for quite a long time. They started working on it in 1943, long before victory was actually achieved. The work was started in Cairo, which was headquarters of the British operation in the Mediterranean. They managed to get this one stamp, the 250 drachmae, for the exact 1 year anniversary of the Italian invasion. So this came out on the 28th of October of 1946. The 250 and the 500 drachmae are scenes from what's called the Battle of the Pindus Mountains in northern Greece. Italian invasion came down through Albania into northern Greece and was met with very stiff resistance. The Greeks, against all expectation, the Greeks did quite well and pushed the Italians back and proceeded to occupy southern Albania for the next few months. This is all material I covered in my presentation last week, so I won't show all the stamps related to it. But these are the women of the Pindus Mountains carrying ammunition and supplies to the troops. So it was, as in other parts of the Greek resistance, it was really not just the army and military forces, but the whole population, large part of it, collaborated in resistance activities. There was a lot of harassment, sabotage, and so forth, and that was part of the nature of the Greek resistance. Um, considerably more, it caused considerably more problems for the Germans than they were expecting. To go on to the other stamps in the series, there's this one honoring the Air Force. This is a ship towing a disabled submarine, presumably a German submarine. We talked about the monument to the Battle of El Alamein, in which the Greeks participated. And this stamp, the 600 drachmae, is worth a closer look. So I'll go back to it. This is the two dates here, the 28th of October, that's the date of the Italian invasion when it started in 1940. And September 22nd, 1944, is actually the end of the Battle of Rimini. Here's Rimini in Italy. That was part of a campaign to push the Germans back across what they call the Gothic Line. It was a coordinated activity of several allies, and the Greeks were involved at Rimini in pushing the Germans back over the Rubicon River. This inscription here on the side says, Potamos is river, Rubicon here. Taras is where the campaign started. The British, this is the Italian naval port of Taranto, which has a very, very long history. I mean, in ancient times, it was a Greek settlement at Taras, and very little remains of the ancient settlement. But then it has a long history all through the Middle Ages and later. And the British attacked and defeated the Italians then in September of 1943. And that was the beginning of the campaign as they moved up the Italian peninsula. And ultimately, the Battle of Rimini was over by September 22nd, 1944. And it was the next month, October of 44, is when the Germans actually surrendered in Greece. A lot of German soldiers were still trapped in various parts of Greece. And as we'll see when we come to the subject of Crete, uh, they didn't want to surrender to the Greek army. They were afraid of reprisals, and they held out for the opportunity to surrender to the British. They apparently thought they'd get better treatment from the British. This is the stamp that is considered part of the same set, the victory set, in the Greek catalogs. It's the Battle of Crete, 1941. So we've just talked about how the Italians invaded in the fall of 1940 and were pushed back and defeated by the Greeks temporarily. The Germans got into the act, and they succeeded in forcing the Greeks to surrender in April of 1941. At that time, the Germans were really on a roll. They were taking over one country after another. They undertook to occupy Crete. They began by an invasion, an aerial and amphibious invasion in May of 1941. This picture actually tells the story, several important aspects of the story of this battle. You can see the troops landing there in parachutes. There's a plane and a number of soldiers coming down in parachutes. This is, according to what I've read, and you know, I'm not a great military historian, but just scratching the surface, you start to hear and learn a few things. This is considered to be the first major airborne invasion. Later on, you know, parachutes were used a lot in the D-Day invasion in Normandy and so forth. But this is the first in 1941, first major invasion of a country. And it was very costly for the Germans. They lost, you know, thousands of soldiers in this. There were great losses on both sides. But what we see here is actually a sort of Greek militias, local Greek citizens, and taking their guns and fighting back against the Germans. It's not so much a formal military action, although the Greek army was involved, as were several other Allied forces. There were about 40,000 Allied troops in Crete there to defend the island. There were British, Australian, and New Zealand. But they were not able to defeat the Germans. After a very bloody battle lasting about 12 days, the Germans did finally succeed in forcing the Allies to leave and taking over and occupying Crete. It looks to me as though you've got on the left here both a man and a woman taking part in this defense of their island. To me, this is a very informative and rather moving picture. In 1950, a stamp was issued again on the 9th anniversary of the invasion and occupation of Crete. Not exactly sure why they chose the 9th anniversary, but here it is. The King of Greece, King George II, the flags of the armies involved, the Allied armies, the Greek flag, the British flag, and this would be the Australian flag and the New Zealand flag. Curious, they're very similar. Not exactly sure how they ended up to be so similar and what this large star represents. Battle of Crete is what we have, the map here. Okay, these are stamps. In my presentation, I mentioned the landscape stamps that were issued during the German occupation. These were printed actually by the major printing company Aspiotis, which had printed a lot of previous Greek stamps. They were assigned to produce these landscape stamps, which replaced the historical issue that I discussed. Some of the stamps received two different overprints, which are listed as semi-postal stamps in the stamp catalogs. This one was issued with a cost of 100,000 drachmae. You can tell there that there's been considerable amount of inflation during the war, and it's for the bombardment of Piraeus, the Greek port, which is the nearest port to Athens. This was bombarded by the Allies in January of 1944, January 11th. The stamp wasn't issued until June of 1944, but it was a fundraising effort for the victims of this bombardment. And there's another semi-postal here issued to support children's camps. This is all, under the auspices of the German occupation. In this case, you see the denomination 50,000 plus 450,000. So the stamp cost 500,000 drachmae. 50,000 was the domestic postal rate at that point. So this is getting to be fairly extreme inflation. And then the 450,000 was the contribution toward the charity in question. This is not a cover I own, but I found this on a website. This is a cover sent from Crete to Piraeus, to Athens, actually, inquiring about a family member who was at Piraeus in the bombardment and asking, whether he had survived and whether he was okay. There were hundreds of casualties on the ground when the Allies bombed Piraeus. So you can see here, this is only 300 drachmae. There are 475 drachmae stamps. That would be this is in January of 1944. So apparently between January and June or July, the postal rate went from 300 to 50,000, at least from the evidence of these stamps. This is apparently a piece of postal stationery with the 2 drachmae stamp overprinted 75, and then 3 more of the landscape stamps added to it. Well, that's it. That's my postscript for now. This is something from last week.